The silence in Alastair Croft's penthouse was not a peaceful thing. It was an asset, curated and expensive, like the sterile white marble that flowed through the rooms or the vast panes of glass that framed a bruised purple Manhattan skyline. This was the kind of silence that didn't echo, the kind that settled, thick and heavy as dust, in the lungs of anyone who had to breathe it for too long. Alara had been breathing it for 364 days. She knew its weight. She knew its taste. It tasted of failure. Her charge, a small porcelain girl named Lily, was the epicenter of this silence. Lily Croft had not laughed in a year, not since her mother had vanished from their lives, an event spoken of only in whispers by the household staff and in furious clipped phone calls by Alistair himself. Alara's file, thick with glowing recommendations from the most exclusive childcare agency in the city, had promised miracles. She was the child whisperer, the expert in trauma-informed care, the one they sent in when all others had failed. And for a year, she had done nothing but fail in the most profound and quiet way imaginable. She sat now on the floor of Lily's playroom, a room that was less a space for play and more a museum of Alistair's wealth. Every toy was educational, ethically sourced, and aesthetically minimalist. They were objects to be admired, not loved. Alara was building a tower of smooth, unvarnished wooden blocks, her movements slow and deliberate. Across from her, Lily watched, her gray eyes holding the same flat, dispassionate sheen as the polished concrete floor. She was a ghost in her own home, a beautiful, tragic accessory to her father's perfect life. Alara did not push. She did not cajole or perform. Her predecessors had tried that. They had come in with bright, loud voices and puppet shows and promises of pony rides. They had lasted, on average, 3 weeks. Alara understood that Lily's silence was a fortress, and you could not storm a fortress built of pain. You had to be invited in. So she sat with Lily in her silence, day after day, offering nothing but her calm, steady presence. A quiet partnership in sorrow. The sound of the elevator door sliding open broke the manufactured peace. Alistair was home early. Alara felt the familiar tightening in her stomach, a reflexive bracing for the casual cruelty that was his primary mode of communication. He moved through his home not as an inhabitant, but as a warden making his rounds. His footsteps were sharp, impatient clicks on the marble, each one a small sonic assault. He appeared in the doorway of the playroom, a figure of tailored perfection. His suit was a shade of gray so dark it was nearly black, his hair artfully disheveled, his jaw set in a line of perpetual dissatisfaction. He held a phone to his ear, his voice a low, serrated murmur. He did not acknowledge Alara or his daughter. He simply stood there, radiating a cold, restless energy that poisoned the air. "No, that's unacceptable," he snapped into the phone. "Liquidate the position. I don't care about the short-term loss. I want it gone." He paused, his eyes finally landing on the scene before him. They swept over Alara, then Lily, and his lip curled in a faint sneer. Since he was a man who hated any evidence of things he could not immediately control or quantify. He ended the call with a sharp tap of his thumb and slid the phone into his jacket pocket. The silence he brought with him was different from Lily's. It was an aggressive, demanding thing. It waited to be filled with apologies or excuses. "Still nothing?" he asked. It was not a question. It was an accusation. Alara met his gaze, her own expression carefully neutral. She had learned early on that any display of emotion was a resource he would exploit. "We're having a quiet afternoon," she said, her voice soft but even. "You've been having a quiet year, Alara," he countered, stepping into the room. He walked around her carefully constructed block tower, his expensive leather shoes coming dangerously close. "I pay the agency a small fortune for their best, for results. And what I have is a daughter who is practically a mute and a nanny who seems to think her only job is to share in the quiet." The way he said the word made it sound like a disease. She did not flinch. She did not defend herself. Arguing with Alistair was like arguing with a storm, pointless and exhausting. She simply held her ground, a small, still island in his vast ocean of discontent. Lily, who usually retreated even further into herself when her father was near, did something unusual. She shifted, just a fraction of an inch, closer to Alara. It was a movement so small, Alistair missed it entirely. But Alara felt it. It was a spark in the endless dark. Alistair seemed to take Ilara's silence as insolence. His frustration, already simmering from his phone call, soul began to boil over. "Look at this," he said, gesturing vaguely at the room. "Blocks! You've been here a year and you're playing with blocks. Did you even take her to the museum exhibit I arranged? The tickets were on the counter." "I did," Ilara replied calmly. She found it overwhelming. "We stayed for 20 minutes and then went to the park. We watched the dogs in the dog run. You took my daughter, whose mother is from one of the founding families of this city, to watch mangy dogs run in the dirt?" His voice was laced with a theatrical disbelief. He was performing now, playing the part of the concerned patrician father for an audience of one. "She smiled," Ilara said, the words quiet but firm. It had not been a laugh, not even close, but it had been a flicker of light, a momentary parting of the clouds. A small terrier was chasing its tail. She smiled at it. "A smile," Alistair scoffed, the sound dripping with contempt. "I'm not paying you for smiles, Alara. I'm paying you for a full-throated, happy, normal child, the kind of child I can take to a benefit without her looking like a Victorian orphan, the kind of child that reflects well on me." He took another step closer, looming over her. "Do you understand the difference?" She understood perfectly. He had not updated the file. He was working from a version of Lily that had never been accurate, a version that was a projection of his own ego. Lily was not an extension of him. She was a person, a small person drowning in a grief he refused to acknowledge. He must have seen the dissent in her eyes, the quiet refusal to accept his narrative. His own eyes narrowed. "Perhaps the agency was wrong about you. Perhaps you're not as competent as your file suggests. Perhaps you're just coasting, taking advantage of a tragic situation." Each word was a carefully sharpened dart, aimed to wound. Alara felt the familiar sting, the cold anger that she had to swallow down day after day. She thought about the nights she'd spent researching childhood trauma. She thought about the gentle routines she had built, the safe spaces she had carved out in this cold, empty home. She thought about the way she held Lily during her silent nightmares, humming softly until the small, trembling body relaxed in her arms. He was about to say more. His mouth was open, his face flushed with the ugly pleasure of his own cruelty. But the chime of the elevator, soft and melodic, cut through the tension. Both of them turned toward the sound. A man stepped out into the foyer. He was not like Alistair. Where Alistair was sharp angles and restless energy, this man was still. He wore a charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the light, tailored with an understated perfection that made Alistair's expensive attire look like a costume. His presence was a weighted blanket, instantly calming the frantic energy in the penthouse. He did not rush. He was not performing. Alistair's entire demeanor shifted in a nanosecond. The sneering tyrant vanished, replaced by an obsequious, almost fawning host. "Julian, you're early. Wonderful. Come in, come in." The man, Julian, moved into the living area, his eyes taking in the entire scene with a sweeping, intelligent glance. He saw Alistair's flushed face. He saw Ilara sitting on the floor, her back straight, her expression unreadable. He saw the small girl hiding behind her. His gaze lingered on Ilara for a moment longer than was polite, a flicker of something unidentifiable in his dark eyes. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. "Croft," Julian said, his voice a low, calm baritone. It was steady as iron wrapped in silk. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, not at all," Alistair boomed, his bonhomie painfully false. "Just having a staff review." He waved a dismissive hand in Alara's direction, as if she were a piece of furniture. This is Alara, Lily's nanny, and my daughter Lily. Julian's gaze shifted to the little girl. He did not smile a wide, toothy grin like most adults did when meeting a child. He simply inclined his head, a small, respectful gesture. Miss Croft, he said, his voice gentle. Then his eyes returned to the block tower on the floor. It was a complex, asymmetrical structure, cleverly balanced. It showed an understanding of physics and a quiet artistry. That's an impressive cantilever, he observed, his gaze lifting to meet Alara's. You have a good sense of structural integrity. The comment was so unexpected, so specific, that it momentarily disarmed her. It was a compliment that saw her intelligence, not just her role. It directly contradicted the narrative of incompetence Alistair had been weaving just seconds before. Alistair, completely missing the subtext, let out a nervous laugh. Alara is full of surprises. Now, can I get you a drink? I have that 25-year-old Macallan you appreciate. He was desperate to move the conversation and Julian's attention away from the domestic scene he had just been savaging. Julian did not look away from Alara. I've heard of you, he said quietly, a statement of fact, not an overture. My mother runs the Nightingale Agency. She speaks very highly of your work, says you're the best they have, the one they send for the impossible cases. The air in the room became very, very still. The power shift was palpable. It was a tectonic event, the ground moving silently beneath their feet. Alistair's face, which had been a mask of fawning hospitality, froze. The smile became a brittle, unnatural thing. He had just spent 10 minutes systematically dismantling the reputation of a woman who was, it turned out, a protected asset of the very people he relied upon for his domestic prestige. He had miscalculated, badly. Alara felt a slow, disorienting wave of vindication wash over her. It wasn't triumphant, it was simply clarifying. She had been seen, correctly. For the first time in a year, someone in this house had looked at her and seen her actual worth, not the diminished version Alistair projected onto her. Julian finally turned his attention to Alistair, but the warmth was gone from his expression. His eyes were cool, analytical. Perhaps we can postpone our discussion, Croft. It seems you have more pressing matters to attend to here. It was a dismissal, polite on the surface, but utterly final, a quiet command. He was ending the meeting before it had even begun, a clear signal of his displeasure. No, it's fine, Alistair stammered, scrambling to regain control of a situation that had irrevocably slipped from his grasp. Alara was just leaving. I don't believe she was, Julian said, his voice dropping even lower, gaining weight and authority with every syllable. He looked back at Alara. Please, don't let us interrupt you. It was a checkmate delivered in a whisper. Alistair was trapped between his need to impress this powerful man and his desire to punish his nanny. He stood there, his mouth slightly agape, a man whose hollow, performed power had just collided with something deep, quiet, and structural. The silence that followed was no longer his. It belonged to Julian, and for the first time in a very long time, Alara felt like she could finally take a full, deep breath. Alistair, defeated, retreated to the wet bar, his movements stiff and awkward. He made a great show of pouring 2 glasses of scotch, his back to the room. It was an act of surrender. Julian ignored him, his focus remaining in the playroom. He took a step closer, not in a way that was intrusive, but with a quiet respect for the space Alara and Lily occupied. He crouched down, a remarkable act for a man in such an impeccably tailored suit. He did not look at Lily directly, understanding that a direct gaze could be perceived as a threat. Instead, he looked at the block tower again. It's difficult to build something so delicate, he said, his voice a low murmur meant only for Alara and the small girl beside her. It requires patience, a steady hand. You can't force the pieces to fit. He was not just talking about the blocks. Alara knew it. He was talking about her work, about Lily. He was acknowledging the slow, painstaking, invisible labor she performed every single day. The validation was so profound, So unexpected, it almost brought tears to her eyes. She blinked them back, refusing to show that kind of vulnerability in front of Alistair. Julian reached out a single, long finger and gently nudged the topmost block, a small, cylindrical piece balanced precariously. He pushed it just enough to make it wobble, then steadied it again. A test of its balance. Then he looked at Lily, a soft, questioning look in his eyes. He was asking for permission. Lily, who had been a statue of silent observation, leaned forward. Her tiny hand, a fragile, pale thing, emerged from behind Alara's back. With a deliberation that was heartbreaking to watch, she reached out and tapped the same block Julian had touched. The tower swayed, a collective gasp held in the air, and then it held. Stable. A genuine smile touched Julian's lips. It transformed his severe face, making him look younger, more approachable. "Well done, Miss Croft," he murmured. Alistair returned with the drinks, his forced smile back in place. "Here we are," he announced, his voice too loud, shattering the delicate moment. "Julian, your scotch." Julian rose to his feet with a fluid grace. He took the glass from Alistair but did not drink. He held it, his gaze still on the playroom, on the woman and the child who had created a small pocket of grace in this cold, sterile environment. "Thank you, Croft," he said. "I'll see myself out. My assistant will be in touch to reschedule." He had not come for a meeting. Alara realized it then. Or if he had, it was no longer his primary objective. He had come, assessed the situation, and passed a silent judgment. Alistair sputtered, trying to salvage the encounter, but Julian was already moving toward the elevator, his presence receding as quietly as it had arrived. Before the doors slid shut, he paused and looked directly at Alara. "It was a pleasure to meet you," he said, and the words felt like a promise. Then he was gone. The silence that returned was different. It was charged, heavy with unspoken things. Alistair stood in the middle of his living room, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand, looking utterly neutered. He had been diminished in his own home. He turned his gaze on Alara, and the look in his eyes was no longer just contempt. It was cold, venomous hatred. She had been the catalyst for his humiliation, and he would not forget it. She knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that her quiet year was over. The storm had finally arrived. The aftermath of Julian's visit was a campaign of quiet, escalating warfare. Alistair did not confront her directly again. He was too much of a coward for that. Instead, he employed 1,000 petty cruelties, a death by 1,000 cuts. Her paycheck was suddenly, inexplicably delayed due to a clerical error. The private car service she occasionally used for Lily's appointments was unavailable. The organic groceries she ordered for Lily's meals were replaced with standard fare, a note left on the counter from the housekeeper stating they were streamlining household expenses. Each act was designed to undermine her, to make her life more difficult, to remind her of her subordinate position. It was a constant, low-grade psychological assault. But Ilara did not break. She did not complain. She simply adapted. She took the subway for appointments, paid for the correct groceries out of her own pocket, and absorbed the slights with the same quiet grace she had shown from the beginning. Her focus was not on Alistair. Her focus was on Lily. And in Lily, something was changing. Julian's visit, his quiet act of seeing and validating both of them, had been a key turning a lock deep inside the little girl. The fortress of silence began to show cracks. She started initiating eye contact with Alara. She would hand her a specific block instead of just watching her build. One afternoon, while they were reading a book about a mischievous bear, a tiny, almost inaudible sound escaped her lips. It was the ghost of a giggle. Alara felt it like a jolt of electricity. She didn't react outwardly, knowing that any sudden movement might scare the sound away forever. She just continued reading, her voice steady, while her heart hammered against her ribs. It was happening. The slow, patient work of a year was beginning to bear fruit. It was on the 365th day, exactly 1 year since her arrival, that the miracle occurred. It was a Tuesday. Rain lashed against the panoramic windows of the penthouse, the sky a miserable gray slate. Alistair was gone, off to a conference in Zurich. The absence of his oppressive energy left the apartment feeling lighter, more breathable. Alara had abandoned the sterile perfection of the playroom and brought a box of old, forgotten art supplies into the main living area. She'd laid a huge canvas dropcloth over the expensive white rug, an act of minor rebellion. She wasn't trying to make Lily paint. She was simply painting herself, swirling bright, messy colors onto a large sheet of paper, humming a tuneless little song. She had a daub of bright blue paint on her nose. She hadn't realized it. She was completely absorbed in her task, a rare moment of simple, unself-conscious joy. Lily sat nearby, watching her, her expression as unreadable as ever. Alara picked up a brush laden with yellow paint, and in a moment of sheer clumsiness, she fumbled it. The brush flew out of her hand in a perfect spinning arc, flinging a streak of brilliant yellow paint across the floor, the sofa, and, most spectacularly, right across Alara's own cheek. She froze, brush clattering to the floor. She looked at the mess, then touched her face, her fingers coming away slick with yellow. She looked at her paint-smeared hand, then at the streak on the pristine white leather sofa, and a genuine, unforced laugh escaped her own lips. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated absurdity. And then it happened. From the small, silent girl sitting on the floor came a sound. It started as a little puff of air, a hiccup. Then it grew. It was a rusty, unused sound, but it was unmistakable. A giggle. It blossomed into a full, clear, beautiful laugh. It was the sound of a spring thaw, of a long, frozen river finally breaking free. Lily laughed. She pointed a small finger at the yellow streak on Alara's face and laughed until tears streamed down her own cheeks. Alara stared at her, her own laughter dying in her throat, replaced by a profound, heart-stopping awe. The sound was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. It echoed in the vast, silent penthouse, chasing away the ghosts, filling the empty spaces with life. She didn't move. She just watched, tears welling in her own eyes as Lily laughed for the first time in a year. The fortress had not been stormed. The door had been opened from the inside. She did not tell Alistair. It was a secret she and Lily shared, a precious, fragile thing that she knew he would somehow tarnish. He would claim it as his own victory, a result of his pressure, his high standards. He would turn it into another data point on his chart of personal success. So she kept it safe. Their secret laughter became a quiet rebellion, erupting in small, private moments, when Alara made a funny face, when a cartoon dog slipped on a banana peel, when Alara pretended one of the stuffed animals was a terrible opera singer. But secrets in that house had a way of getting out. One evening, Alistair came home to find Alara and Lily on the floor, building a lopsided pillow fort. He heard the sound before he saw them, a light, airy giggle from his daughter. He froze in the doorway, his expression a complicated mess of shock, jealousy, and a dark, possessive anger. He had not been the one to break the silence. This woman, this employee whom he despised and had tried to break, had succeeded where he had failed. His mind did not register it as a gift. It registered it as a threat. She had a connection to his daughter that he did not. She had a power in his home that he had not granted her. His miscalculation began that night. He started to see Alara not just as an incompetent nanny or an object of his contempt, but as a rival. And Alistair Croft did not tolerate rivals. His approach shifted from petty cruelty to something more insidious. He began to praise her in a cloying, uncomfortable way, always in front of Lily. "Isn't Ilara wonderful, darling? So good at making you happy." He would try to join their games, his presence immediately sucking all the joy out of the room. He was trying to co-opt their relationship, to position himself as the benevolent overseer of the happiness she created. One night, after Lily was asleep, he cornered her in the kitchen. She was wiping down the counters, her body tired from a long day. He came and stood too close, blocking her exit. The air was thick with the smell of the expensive scotch on his breath. "You've done a remarkable job, Alara," he said, his voice a low purr that made her skin crawl. "Truly remarkable. I underestimated you." "I'm just doing my job, Mr. Croft," she said, her tone level, her eyes fixed on the marble countertop. "No, it's more than that," he insisted, taking another step closer. He reached out and placed a hand on her arm. His touch was proprietary, possessive. "You have a gift, and I believe in rewarding gifted employees." She did not scream. She did not pull away violently. She simply stopped what she was doing and looked at him. Her gaze was direct, cold, and utterly unimpressed. "Let go of my arm," she said. The words were not a request. They were a command, delivered with a quiet authority that momentarily stunned him. He was so used to her placid endurance that this clear, hard boundary was a shock. For a second, he looked almost confused. Then his arrogance reasserted itself. A slow, ugly smile spread across his face. He thought it was a negotiation. "Don't be like that, Alara," he murmured. "We could have a very beneficial arrangement for both of us." "There will be no arrangement," she said, her voice like chips of ice. "I am your daughter's nanny, nothing more. Now please, let go of my arm." His face darkened. Rejection was not something Alistair Croft handled with grace. His fingers tightened on her arm, his thumb digging into the soft flesh. It was a reminder of his physical power over her. "You're in my home, Alara. You live by my rules. Don't forget who signs your checks." "And don't you forget that I can walk out that door right now and call the Nightingale Agency," she countered, her voice dangerously quiet. "I imagine they would be very interested to hear about your performance reviews." She had called his bluff. The mention of the agency, and by extension Julian and his powerful mother, was the only weapon she had. For a moment, she saw fear in his eyes, fear of being exposed, of losing face. He dropped her arm as if it had burned him. His face was a mask of fury. He had been thwarted, challenged, and humiliated for a second time. And it was all her fault. "Get out of my sight!" he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. She walked away, her head held high, but her heart was pounding. She knew this was the end. He would not let this go. He would find a way to destroy her. She went to her small, sterile room at the back of the penthouse and locked the door. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark, her mind racing. She was trapped. But then she remembered. A quiet man in a charcoal suit, a calm voice that had seen her, truly seen her. She remembered the promise in his eyes. She took out her wallet, and from a hidden flap, she pulled a business card. The card was thick, cream-colored stock, with a single name embossed in elegant, dark gray lettering, Julian Thorne, and below it, a private number. Her hand trembled as she reached for her phone. She had one move left to make. It was time to spring the trap. The phone rang only once before he answered. There was no greeting, no preamble, just a calm, steady, "Yes," as if he had been waiting for her call. "It's Alara," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "From Alistair Croft's apartment." There was a pause on the other end, but it was not a pause of confusion. It was the kind of silence that listens. "I remember," he said. His voice was a lifeline in the dark. "Are you all right?" "No," she said, the single word cracking with the weight of all the things she had held inside for a year. Things have escalated. I need to leave." "I see," Julian said. There was no surprise in his tone. He was not a man who was easily surprised. "Pack a small bag with your essentials. Passport, personal items. Leave everything else. A car will be downstairs in 15 minutes. The driver's name is Arthur. He will be holding a tablet with the Thorne Industries logo. Do not speak to anyone else. Do not go anywhere else. Do you understand?" His instructions were so precise, so calm and authoritative that they cut through her panic. He was not offering suggestions. He was laying out a plan that was already in motion. "Yes," she whispered. But Lily will be handled, he said, and the finality in his voice was absolute. It was not a vague promise. It was a statement of strategic intent. Your priority right now is your own safety. We will handle the rest. 15 minutes, Alara. The line went dead. She moved with a newfound purpose, her fear replaced by a cold, clear resolve. She packed as instructed, her movements swift and silent. She took one last look around the small room that had been her prison for a year. She felt no sentimentality, just a profound sense of relief. Slipping out of her room was easy. The apartment was quiet. Alistair had retreated to his study, likely drinking and plotting her demise. She moved like a shadow through the marble expanse, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She did not allow herself to go to Lily's room. Saw a goodbye would be a betrayal of the promise in Julian's voice. Lily will be handled. She had to trust that. The elevator ride down felt like an eternity. When the doors opened onto the grand, empty lobby, she saw him. An older man in a black suit, standing discreetly by the main doors, holding a tablet with a subtle, elegant T logo. Arthur. He saw her and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He opened the door for her, and she stepped out into the rain-slicked New York night. A black sedan, sleek and silent as a panther, was waiting at the curb. He opened the back door for her, and she slid inside. The interior of the car was a cocoon of soft leather and profound silence. The city's noise vanished. Arthur got into the driver's seat, and the car pulled away from the curb with a smooth, powerful grace. She did not look back at the gleaming tower where she had spent the last year of her life. She looked forward through the rain-streaked windshield at the glittering, uncertain future. The next 2 weeks were a blur of disorienting comfort. She was housed in a beautiful private suite at a hotel Julian's family owned, a place of quiet luxury and absolute discretion. She was attended to by a small, efficient staff who anticipated her needs before she was even aware of them. Julian's assistant, a sharp, kind woman named Clara, met with her daily, updating her on the situation. Alistair had, as expected, fired her. He had called the Nightingale Agency the morning after her departure, his voice thick with performative rage, accusing her of theft and abandoning her post. He threatened to sue her, to have her blacklisted, to ruin her. But the agency, run by Julian's formidable mother, had simply listened politely and then informed him that due to his breach of their contract's harassment clause, they were terminating their relationship with him effective immediately. They also informed him that their legal team would be in touch. Alistair's attempt to destroy her had bounced off a wall of quiet, structural power he hadn't even known was there. Julian himself visited her once. He did not come to her suite. He met her in a private walled garden on the hotel's roof. He was dressed in another perfect suit, this one dark blue. He brought her a cup of tea. "How are you?" he asked, his gaze searching her face. "I'm safe," she said, and the word felt new and strange in her mouth. "Thank you. I don't know how to thank you." "There's no need," he said, waving it away. "My mother founded her agency to protect women like you as much as to place them. Alistair Croft is a liability we should have identified sooner. That failure is ours, not yours." He took a sip of his own tea. "Our family has filed a motion with the court. We're petitioning for temporary guardianship of Lily, citing neglect and an unstable home environment. We have statements from 3 of her former nannies, the household staff, and a child psychologist who has reviewed your daily logs from the past year." Alara stared at him, stunned. He had been building a case. Quietly, methodically, in the background. Her detailed logs, which Alistair had dismissed as a waste of time, were now the primary evidence against him. "He'll fight it," she said, her voice hollow. "Of course he will," Julian agreed. "He sees Lily as a possession, an asset. He will fight for her the same way he would fight for a stock portfolio. But he will lose. People like Alistair always overestimate their own strength. They mistake noise for power." He paused, his expression serious. "The court hearing is in 2 weeks, but before that there is an event, the annual Obsidian Gala. It's the biggest charity event of the season. Alistair is the chairman of the board this year. It's the pinnacle of his social calendar. His entire identity is tied up in it. Alara frowned, confused. What does that have to do with anything? A slow, dangerous smile touched Julian's lips. It was the smile of a predator who has his prey exactly where he wants it. People like Alistair need to be dismantled publicly, he said. Their power is built on perception, on the audience. So, you take away the audience, or you give them a different show, and that is where I need your help. He looked at her, his dark eyes intense. I would like you to be my guest at the gala. The night of the Obsidian Gala arrived on a wave of cold, crisp autumn air. Ilara stood before the full-length mirror in her hotel suite, a stranger to herself. Clara had arranged for a designer to create a gown for her. It was the color of a stormy sea, a deep, shimmering teal that shifted to gray in the light. It was elegant, architectural, and utterly commanding. Her hair was swept up in a sophisticated chignon, and delicate diamond earrings, a loan from Julian's mother, glittered at her ears. She was not the nanny from the penthouse. She was not the quiet, enduring woman in sensible shoes. She was a reinvention, a revelation. When Julian arrived to collect her, he stopped dead in the doorway of her suite. He was in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, the picture of understated power. But for a single, unguarded moment, his composure cracked. He simply stared at her, his eyes wide with an emotion she couldn't quite name. It was more than appreciation. It was awe. Ilara, he said, his voice a little rough. You look correct. It was the most beautiful compliment she had ever received. Not beautiful. Not stunning. Correct. As if this was who she was always meant to be, and the world was finally seeing it. They arrived at the gala in his silent, powerful car. The entrance was a chaotic circus of flashing cameras and shouting reporters. Julian's car was waved through to a private entrance. He helped her out, his hand warm and steady at the small of her back. They moved through the crush of people. A calm island in a sea of noise and desperation. Heads turned as they entered the grand ballroom. Conversations faltered. Julian Thorne did not typically attend such public events, and when he did, he never brought a guest. His presence alone was a statement. His presence with a beautiful unknown woman on his arm was a declaration. They found their table, a prime location near the stage. From her seat, Ilara had a clear view of the entire room. She saw Alistair standing near the podium, preening and accepting congratulations. He was in his element, the master of his universe. He hadn't seen them yet. The evening wore on, a pageant of wealth and ego. Speeches were made, pledges were announced. Alistair took the stage to give the chairman's address. He was smug, confident, his voice booming through the sound system. He spoke of family, of legacy, of providing a future for the city's children. The irony was so thick, Ilara felt she might choke on it. It was as he was leaving the stage, basking in the applause, that he finally saw them. His eyes scanned the room, and then they landed on their table, on her. His smile froze, then collapsed. The color drained from his face. He saw her, in her magnificent gown, sitting beside the one man in the city he could not afford to cross. His mind, unable to process the reality, defaulted to its basest instinct. Rage. He strode toward their table, his movements jerky, his face a thunderous mask. People cleared a path for him, sensing the impending confrontation. The ambient chatter in the ballroom began to die down as more and more people turned to watch the unfolding drama. "What is the meaning of this?" he hissed, his voice a low, vicious snarl as he reached their table. He was speaking to Julian, but his eyes, filled with a venomous, possessive hatred, were locked on Ilara. "What is she doing here?" Julian did not stand. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked up at Alistair, his expression one of mild curiosity, as if observing a particularly interesting insect. "She is my guest, Croft. Please lower your voice. You're making a scene." "Your guest?" Alistair spat, his voice rising despite Julian's warning. He pointed a trembling finger at Alara. "This is my nanny, a disgruntled employee I had to fire for theft. She has no right to be here. She is a gold-digging nobody who should be thrown out." A wave of murmurs rippled through the nearby tables. This was the show Julian had promised. Alara felt a flicker of the old fear, the instinct to shrink, set them to disappear. But then she felt Julian's hand cover hers on the table, a small, grounding gesture of solidarity. She met Alistair's furious gaze and held it, her own expression calm and unyielding. She would not be diminished by him again. "I think you're mistaken," Julian said, his voice still deceptively mild. He took a sip of his water. "Ilara is one of the most gifted child development specialists in the country. My mother considers her a prodigy. As for her employment status, it is my understanding that she resigned her position due to an untenable and hostile work environment, a fact that multiple former employees are willing to corroborate under oath." Alistair's face went from white to a blotchy, furious red. "This is absurd! You can't possibly believe her lies over mine. I am the chairman of this foundation." "You were the chairman," Julian interrupted, the words falling like stones into the sudden silence. He slid his phone across the table. The screen lit up. On it was the homepage of a major financial news network. The headline, posted just 3 minutes ago, read, "Alistair Croft ousted from Croft Holdings in hostile takeover. Thorne Industries assumes control." Alistair stared at the screen, his eyes wide with disbelief. He shook his head, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. "No, that's not possible. My shares. My board." "Your board was concerned about your increasingly erratic behavior and some questionable accounting practices," Julian explained, his voice a calm surgical tool, dissecting Alistair's life, piece by piece. "They were looking for a stable new partner. I was happy to oblige. Your shares were leveraged against a series of loans, which, as of this morning, my bank acquired and called in. Croft Holdings is mine." Alistair staggered back, his hand flying to his chest. He looked around the room at the faces staring at him, faces that had been smiling and clapping for him just minutes before. Now they were watching him with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. "My penthouse," he whispered, his voice cracking, "is a corporate asset of a company I now own," Julian said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "My security team is there now, packing your personal effects. They will be delivered to a storage unit tomorrow. You should find somewhere else to sleep tonight." It was a complete and total annihilation, executed with brutal, quiet precision. Alistair Croft's world had been dismantled in less than 5 minutes, in front of everyone whose opinion he valued. The foundation of his identity, built on money and status, had been turned to dust. He made a terrible, guttural sound, a sob of pure agony and despair. His knees buckled. He fell to the floor, a broken, weeping man in an expensive tuxedo. The arrogant tyrant was gone, replaced by a pathetic, ruined creature. Security, the venue's own men who ultimately answered to Julian's family, moved in smoothly. They lifted the sobbing Alistair to his feet and escorted him from the ballroom, his cries echoing in the stunned silence. The show was over. In the wake of Alistair's spectacular implosion, a hush fell over the grand ballroom. The silence was absolute, a vacuum where the noise and chatter had been. Then, slowly, Julian stood up. He pulled Ilara's chair out for her and helped her to her feet. His touch gentle and reassuring, he did not look at the gawking crowd. He only looked at her. "I believe it's time for another introduction," he said, his voice calm but carrying in the stillness. He turned to face the room, his hand resting proprietarily at the small of Ilara's back. The gesture was both protective and declarative. "Many of you knew Mr. Croft," he began, his voice a low, commanding rumble that needed no microphone. "You knew the man he presented to the world. What you did not know is that the greatest asset in his life was not his company or his portfolio. It was this woman beside me." He looked at Ilara, his expression softening. "For the past year, Ilara has been the sole architect of his daughter's recovery and well-being. She has been the most capable, compassionate, and resilient person in every room she has entered. She took on an impossible situation, and through sheer force of will and intelligence, she performed a miracle. She brought a child back from a place of profound silence and grief. She is not a nanny. She is a force of nature. He then turned his gaze back to the stunned audience, his eyes sweeping over the powerful faces. Thorne Industries and the Nightingale Foundation will be partnering to create a new national center for childhood trauma and recovery. It will be the largest of its kind in the country, and I am honored to announce that Ilara has agreed to serve as its founding director. A gasp went through the room. It was more than a vindication. It was an anointing. He had not just saved her, he had elevated her, placing her on a pedestal of her own making. Built from the competence he had recognized from the very first moment. He had given her a kingdom to match her abilities. He leaned in, his lips close to her ear. "Is that title acceptable?" he murmured, a hint of dry wit in his tone. She looked up at him, a real smile finally reaching her eyes. A smile that was not for a child, not for a performance, but for herself. "I'll consider it," she whispered back. He led her from the ballroom, away from the whispers and the stares, out onto a secluded marble balcony that overlooked the glittering tapestry of the city. The cool night air felt clean, fresh. The distant sounds of traffic were a soothing hum. For a long moment, they stood in silence, simply breathing. Ilara leaned against the balustrade, the weight of the last year, the last hour, finally beginning to settle. It was over. The constant tension in her shoulders, the knot of anxiety in her stomach, the feeling of being perpetually braced for impact. It was all gone. A slow, profound exhale escaped her lips. It felt like she was breathing out a year of fear and endurance. "Are you all right?" Julian asked, his voice soft. "I think so," she said, her voice a little shaky. "I feel correctly placed." She used his own word, and she saw the flicker of a smile on his face in the moonlight. "Good," he said. "That was the intention." He moved to stand beside her, his shoulder almost brushing against hers. He did not touch her, but she could feel the warmth and stillness of his presence. It was a comfort, a safe harbor. "What happens now?" she asked. "With Lily?" "The temporary guardianship was granted this afternoon," he said. "My mother is with her now. At our family home upstate. She's safe. She's been asking for you." Ilara's heart ached with a mixture of relief and longing. "I want to see her." "We'll go first thing in the morning," he promised. "She needs you, and I suspect we need her." He paused, turning to face her more fully. The city lights cast his chiseled features in sharp relief. "Ilara, the directorship is real. The funding is already in place. It's yours, if you want it. A chance to do the work you were meant to do on your own terms with unlimited resources." It was an incredible offer, a life's work, a purpose. But there was a question hanging in the air between them, a silent, unspoken thing. "And what about you?" she asked quietly. "Where do you fit in this new picture?" Julian looked out at the city, his expression unreadable for a moment. "I have spent my life building things," he said, his voice reflective. "Companies, fortunes, structures of power. It's what I know. But it is a cold, quiet business. It lacks a heart." He turned back to her, his gaze direct and vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "I am asking you to stay, not just as a director, not as a nanny for Lily, but as a partner. To me." He was not a man of flowery speeches or grand romantic gestures. His proposal was like everything else about him, direct, honest, and built on a foundation of solid, observable fact. He saw her competence, her strength, her grace. He had seen it from the first moment. He wasn't offering passion. He was offering recognition. He wasn't offering a whirlwind romance. He was offering a partnership of equals. He was offering a home. "My life is complicated," he said, a note of warning in his voice. My family, my business. It's not simple. Alara thought of the cold, simple silence of Alistair's penthouse. She thought of the simple, brutal cruelty of a man who saw people as objects. I don't leave because things become complicated, she said, her voice steady and clear. I leave when they become hollow. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. He reached out and took her hand. His grasp was warm, firm, and sure. It was not a gesture of possession. It was a gesture of connection. Then stay, he said simply, and help me build something that isn't. She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. In his eyes, she did not see a savior or a prince. She saw a man who had recognized her strength when she was at her weakest, who had valued her mind when others saw only her role. Someone and who had offered her not a rescue, but a throne of her own. She saw a quiet sovereign who was looking for his queen. Yes, she said. The word was quiet, but it held the weight of 1,000 silent days and the promise of 1,000 more filled with laughter. Standing there, high above the city that had almost broken her, she felt a profound sense of peace settle over her, the kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles, the kind that finally feels like home. The past was a closed book, its final chapter a spectacular, fiery ruin. The future was an open page, waiting for a new story to be written, and for the first time, she felt ready to write it, together.